What if everything you know about the Titanic is a lie? 10 dark secrets that the survivors took to their graves, and some that followed them beyond. You'll never see this disaster the same way again. The billionaire's lucky escape. J.P. Morgan, one of the world's richest men and the Titanic's financier, cancelled his passage at the last minute, along with a suspicious number of other elite passengers who all found convenient excuses to skip the voyage. The pattern of cancellations reads like a roll call of America's financial aristocracy. Morgan himself claimed illness, citing the need to remain at a French spa for his health. His excuse seemed genuine enough until photographs surfaced of him touring Egypt in perfect health just days after the Titanic's departure. George Washington Vanderbilt II, heir to one of America's greatest fortunes, suddenly decided his schedule was too demanding. Steel magnate Henry Clay Frick cited business obligations that simply couldn't wait. The list grew eerily long. Chocolate heiress Milton Hershey changed his travel plans. Guglielmo Marconi, inventor of the wireless telegraph, accepted free passage on an earlier ship. Robert Bacon, former US ambassador to France, found urgent matters requiring his immediate attention in Europe. Each man had perfectly reasonable explanations. Business emergencies, health concerns, scheduling conflicts, the mundane realities of wealthy, busy lives. But the sheer concentration of cancellations among America's financial elite raised uncomfortable questions. These were the very men who stood to benefit most from the Titanic's success, yet none were aboard to witness their investment's maiden voyage. Morgan's case is particularly intriguing. As the ship's primary financier, he had reserved the most luxurious suite aboard the vessel. His decision to skip the voyage saved him from disaster, but also meant he avoided personal risk in an enterprise that would ultimately cost him millions. Was it remarkable foresight, incredible luck, or something far more calculated? But the wealthy weren't the only ones who seemed to know what was coming. The prophet who saw it coming. 14 years before the Titanic sank, a psychic named W.T. Stead published a story about a ship disaster caused by insufficient lifeboats, then boarded the Titanic himself and went down with it. W.T. Stead was no ordinary passenger. The 62-year-old British journalist was one of the most famous men of his era, a pioneering investigative reporter who had exposed government corruption and championed social reform. But Stead also claimed to possess psychic abilities, conducting seances and allegedly communicating with spirits from beyond the grave. His supernatural interests led him to write fiction that seemed disturbingly prophetic. In 1886, Stead published How the Mail Steamer Went Down in Mid-Atlantic by a Survivor, a chilling tale of a ship that sank due to insufficient lifeboats and inadequate safety regulations. His fictional disaster killed hundreds of passengers who might have been saved if proper precautions had been taken. 6 years later, he wrote another maritime horror story, From the Old World to the New, featuring a ship that collided with an iceberg in the North Atlantic. Both stories read like blueprints for the Titanic disaster, complete with specific details about lifeboat shortages and ice-related accidents. Stead had essentially written the script for his own death decades before it occurred. In April 1912, Stead boarded the Titanic in Southampton, traveling to New York to speak at a peace conference. He was reportedly in high spirits during the voyage, dining with fellow first-class passengers and regaling them with ghost stories. On the night of April 14th, witnesses saw him helping women and children into lifeboats, displaying the same heroic behaviour he had written about in his fictional disasters. Stead's body was never recovered from the Atlantic. The man who had predicted maritime catastrophe with uncanny accuracy became one of its 1,500 victims. But prophecy wasn't the only supernatural force aboard that night. The Pharaoh's Revenge. An ancient Egyptian mummy supposedly aboard the Titanic had already claimed dozens of lives across Europe, and the ship's sinking was just its latest act of supernatural vengeance. The story begins in 1889 when British archaeologists discovered the ornate coffin of Amen-Ra, a priestess from ancient Thebes in a tomb near Luxor. The artifact was magnificent, decorated with intricate hieroglyphs, and the haunting face of a woman whose eyes seemed to follow observers around the room. But magnificence came with a price that no one could have anticipated. The first victim was the expedition's photographer. Within hours of taking pictures of the mummy case, he was found dead in his tent, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The expedition leader died next, followed by the British consul who had arranged the artefact's transport to England. By the time the cursed relic reached the British Museum, it had allegedly claimed 13 lives. Museum workers who handled the coffin reported violent nightmares, mysterious illnesses, and bizarre accidents. Night watchmen refused to patrol the Egyptian wing alone. One security guard was found dead at his post with no apparent cause, his face bearing the same expression of primal fear as the photographer in Egypt. The museum's board, desperate to rid themselves of the cursed artifact, quietly arranged for its sale to a private American collector in 1912. The buyer planned to transport his macabre acquisition aboard the most advanced ship ever built, a vessel so technologically superior that it was proclaimed unsinkable by its creators. The mummy case was reportedly loaded into the Titanic's cargo hold on April 10, 1912. 4 days later, the ship struck an iceberg and sank in the North Atlantic, taking 1,500 souls with it. While supernatural forces may have doomed the ship, human negligence sealed its fate. The warnings, they ignored. In the 24 hours before disaster struck, the Titanic received 7 separate ice warnings from other ships, and the radio operator told the final messenger to shut up and stop jamming his signal. The warnings began arriving on Saturday, April 13th, each one more urgent than the last. The French liner La Touraine reported icebergs and extensive field ice. The White Star liner Baltic warned of large icebergs 5 miles south of the steamer track. The German ship America radioed that they had passed 2 large bergs and a field of pack ice. Each message was dutifully delivered to the bridge, where Captain Edward Smith and his officers noted the information with casual indifference. Sunday brought even more desperate communications. The Californian reported being surrounded by ice and warned that the field extended far to the south. The Mesaba sent a detailed message describing a heavy pack ice field directly in the Titanic's path, stretching for miles across their intended route. But the most crucial warning never reached the bridge at all. At 11 p.m., just 30 minutes before impact, Cyril Evans aboard the nearby Californian attempted one final warning. The ice field was massive, dangerous, and directly ahead of the Titanic's position. But Jack Phillips, the Titanic's overworked radio operator, was frantically trying to clear a backlog of passenger messages that had piled up during an earlier equipment failure. When Evans's signal interrupted his transmission, Phillips angrily tapped back, "Shut up, shut up." "I am busy. I am working Cape Race." Evans, insulted and exhausted, switched off his radio and went to bed. The Titanic steamed ahead at nearly full speed through a moonless night, her officers blinded by their own arrogance and the deadly belief that their ship was too advanced to be threatened by mere ice. But ice wasn't the only danger lurking in the darkness. The ship that watched it die. Just 19 miles away, the crew of the SS Californian watched mysterious rockets explode in the night sky over the Titanic's location, and did absolutely nothing to help. Captain Stanley Lord of the Californian had made the prudent decision to stop his ship for the night, surrounded by a treacherous field of pack ice. His vessel sat motionless in the frigid Atlantic darkness, engines shut down, waiting for dawn to safely navigate through the frozen maze. Just 40 minutes later, the Titanic struck an iceberg and began firing distress rockets. From the Californian's deck, Second Officer Herbert Stone watched 8 white rockets burst against the star-filled sky. The ship that was firing them appeared to be moving strangely, listing at an odd angle. Stone reported the rockets to Captain Lord, who was resting in the chart room below. Lord's response was fatalistic indifference. He suggested the rockets might be company signals or celebratory fireworks. He never ordered his radio operator awakened. He never commanded his engines to start. He simply told Stone to keep watching and went back to sleep. For over an hour, Stone watched the distant ship's lights grow dimmer and lower on the horizon until they disappeared entirely. He assumed the vessel had simply sailed away into the night. In reality, he had witnessed 1,500 people sliding beneath the icy Atlantic waves. The indifference of nearby ships wasn't the only human failure that night. The drill that never happened. The one safety measure that might have saved hundreds of lives, A lifeboat drill scheduled for the morning of April 14th was mysteriously cancelled by Captain Smith for reasons no one has ever satisfactorily explained. Sunday morning dawned clear and calm as the Titanic cruised through the North Atlantic. The ship's manifest called for a mandatory lifeboat drill at 11 a.m., a routine safety exercise that would familiarise crew members with emergency procedures and test the mechanical systems that could mean the difference between life and death. The drill was particularly important because many of the Titanic's crew were new to the ship, having been transferred from other vessels just days before departure. Captain Edward Smith, making his final voyage before retirement, made an inexplicable decision. He cancelled the drill entirely. Some accounts suggest he wanted to allow passengers to attend church services in the ship's dining room. Others claim he simply felt the exercise was unnecessary on such a magnificent vessel. Whatever his reasoning, Smith condemned his crew to face their greatest test completely unprepared. The consequences of this decision became horrifically apparent 12 hours later. When the Titanic struck the iceberg and the order came to prepare the lifeboats, chaos erupted across the deck. Many crew members had never operated the boat davits before. Officers weren't sure how many people each lifeboat could safely hold. Some boats were lowered with only a handful of passengers, while others were overfilled to the point of danger. Fifth Officer Harold Lowe later testified that he had never participated in a lifeboat drill aboard the Titanic. Chief Officer Henry Wilde admitted he was unfamiliar with the ship's safety equipment. The crew that was supposed to save lives spent precious minutes fumbling with unfamiliar mechanisms, while the ship slowly settled deeper into the icy water. But the crew's unpreparedness wasn't the ship's only hidden weakness. The fire that doomed them all. Deep in the Titanic's belly, a coal bunker fire had been burning for over 3 weeks before the ship ever hit the iceberg, and it may have been the real reason she sank so quickly. The fire began during the ship's construction in Belfast, a seemingly minor mishap in coal bunker number 6 on the starboard side. Spontaneous combustion in coal bunkers was a common hazard of the era, usually dealt with by simply burning through the affected coal and removing the debris. But this fire was different. It burned hotter and longer than anyone anticipated, reaching temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and creating a hellish glow deep within the ship's steel belly. The White Star Line faced an impossible choice. Delaying the Titanic's maiden voyage would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and destroy the company's reputation for punctuality. The fire wasn't immediately dangerous to passengers, and the crew believed they could extinguish it during the crossing. So they made a fateful decision. They would sail with the ship, literally burning from within. Throughout the voyage, a team of firemen worked around the clock to contain the blaze, shoveling burning coal into the ship's furnaces at a frantic pace. Passengers never knew that just feet below their luxurious cabins, men were fighting a desperate battle against an inferno that had been raging for weeks. The fire's location was catastrophically unfortunate. Coal Bunker 6 sat directly behind the ship's hull plates in the exact area where the iceberg would later strike. For 3 weeks, those steel plates had been subjected to extreme heat, potentially weakening their structural integrity and making them more vulnerable to impact damage. When the iceberg tore into the Titanic's starboard side, it may not have been striking pristine steel, but metal that had been compromised by weeks of intense heat. Some conspiracists claim the fire was just a cover for an even more elaborate deception. The ship that never was. What if the Titanic never actually sank? The most elaborate conspiracy theory claims the unsinkable ship was secretly swapped with her damaged sister ship, the Olympic, in the ultimate insurance fraud. The theory begins with the Olympic's troubled history. In September 1911, the nearly identical sister ship collided with the HMS Hawke, suffering severe damage to her hull and propeller shaft. The Royal Navy blamed the Olympic for the accident, leaving the White Star Line facing massive repair costs and no insurance payout. JP Morgan's shipping empire was hemorrhaging money, and the Olympic had become a financial albatross threatening to sink the entire company. Conspiracy theorists claim Morgan orchestrated an audacious switch. During the winter of 1911 to 1912, both ships sat side by side in Belfast's Harland and Wolff shipyard. According to the theory, workers secretly swapped the ships' identities, painting Titanic on the damaged Olympic's hull, while the real Titanic was quietly sold to unnamed buyers. The alleged evidence includes differences in porthole configurations between construction photos and the final vessel, last-minute crew changes that removed experienced sailors, and the convenient cancellation of so many wealthy passengers. Theorists point to Morgan's financial desperation and the suspicious timing of his own absence from the voyage. However, maritime historians have systematically demolished this theory. The ships had hundreds of documented differences in design, construction, and fittings that would have made any switch impossible to conceal. Rivets, room layouts, and structural elements all confirm the wreck on the ocean floor is indeed the Titanic. Yet the theory persists because it offers something more satisfying than random tragedy. The idea that 1,500 deaths served a calculated purpose. Whether conspiracy or coincidence, when disaster finally struck, heroes and cowards revealed themselves. The band that chose to die. As 1,500 people screamed and drowned in the icy Atlantic, 8 musicians stood on the sloping deck and played hymns until the very moment the ship disappeared beneath the waves. Wallace Hartley, the band's 33-year-old leader, had made a promise to his fiancée before embarking on the voyage. If he ever found himself on a sinking ship, he told her, he would play "Nearer My God to Thee" as his final song. It was a morbid joke between lovers, the kind of dark humour that sailors use to ward off fate. Neither of them imagined he would have the chance to keep that promise. When the Titanic struck the iceberg at 11:40 p.m, Hartley gathered his 7 musicians and made an extraordinary decision. Instead of rushing for the lifeboats like any rational person would do, they retrieved their instruments and began to play. Their music wasn't meant for entertainment. It was meant to prevent total panic as the reality of the disaster slowly dawned on the 2,200 souls aboard the dying ship. For nearly 3 hours, as the Titanic's bow sank deeper and her stern rose higher into the star-filled night, the band played on. They performed ragtime tunes and popular songs, anything to maintain a sense of normalcy while chaos erupted around them. Passengers later described the surreal experience of hearing cheerful melodies, while lifeboats splashed into the dark water below. As the ship's final moments approached and the deck tilted at an impossible angle, witnesses reported hearing the opening notes of a hymn. Some claimed it was "Nearer My God to Thee." Others insisted it was "Autumn," a popular Episcopal hymn. The debate continues to this day, but the melody hardly matters. What matters is that 8 men chose to die with dignity, playing music while the ocean claimed their lives. But for those who lived, survival became its own kind of hell. The survivor's curse. Many Titanic survivors spent the rest of their lives wishing they had died on the ship, haunted by guilt, trauma, and the supernatural belief that death was simply postponed, not avoided. The psychological aftermath of survival proved almost as deadly as the disaster itself. Colonel Archibald Gracie, who had helped load lifeboats and was pulled from the water barely alive, never recovered from the experience. He became obsessed with documenting every detail of the sinking, interviewing survivors, and writing a comprehensive account that consumed his remaining years. The stress and trauma killed him just 8 months after his rescue, his health destroyed by survivor's guilt and the relentless replaying of that terrible night. Jack Thayer was just 17 years old when he jumped from the Titanic's deck into the freezing Atlantic. He survived by clinging to an overturned lifeboat, watching the ship's lights disappear beneath the waves while listening to the screams of 1,500 dying souls. The experience shattered his mind. For decades, he struggled with depression, alcoholism, and the crushing weight of having lived when so many others perished. The guilt was methodical and merciless. Why had he survived when stronger, more deserving people died? What cosmic injustice allowed a teenager to live while families were torn apart in the icy water? The questions tormented him until 1945, when Thayer finally ended his suffering with a razor blade, unable to carry the burden of his survival any longer. Other survivors reported similar struggles. They suffered nightmares about drowning passengers, phantom sounds of screaming in the night, and an overwhelming sense that they had cheated death temporarily, rather than escaped it permanently. Many developed an obsessive fear of water. Some refused to ever board another ship. The Titanic had claimed 1,500 lives on April 15th, 1912, but its hunger wasn't satisfied. For decades afterward, it continued harvesting souls, claiming its survivors one by one through suicide, madness, and guilt-induced illness. These 10 secrets reveal a truth more terrifying than any conspiracy. The Titanic was never just a ship that hit an iceberg. It was a perfect storm of human arrogance, supernatural malevolence, and cosmic cruelty that turned mankind's greatest achievement into history's most haunting tragedy. The question isn't why the Titanic sank. It's how the universe conspired to ensure that 1,500 souls would meet their fate on that cold April night. Some ships sink. This one was sacrificed.